is ETV World. I'm Tabitha John. In this episode, we'll be talking about one of the East African nations, Somalia. Somalia has been experiencing the oldest civil war in Africa. After decades of crisis, Somalia is still unstable and home to many armed actors. Of course, the decades of conflict affecting Somalia are deep-rooted into its history and continue to shape the country's history, and it also affects its neighbors like Ethiopia. The million-dollar question is then, can the second-time president of Somalia, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, change this course of Somalia's history? Can Sheikh Mohamud take Somalia out of decades of conflict into a field of peace? Maybe or maybe not, as no one can say anything for sure about the future. But let us see what has happened in Somalia just in brief. This is ETV World. After independence in 1960, Somalia enjoyed a period of stability and even was labeled as the Switzerland of Africa. But democracy did not last long. General Mohamed Siad Barre seized power in a military coup in 1969, and his dictatorship runs for 22 years. Barre waged an aggression against Ethiopia, but ended up in failure, and his allies abandoned him in the middle. His rule became more and more brutal, and tribes across the country rose up against him. He eventually falls from power. After years of bloody civil war, it was in 2012 Somalia again attempted to create a central government. Accordingly, the country has managed to form an internationally recognized government with the adoption of a new constitution. It was then the time Hassan Sheikh Mohamud became the 8th president of Somalia. Mohamud served in the position from 2012 to 2017. Mohamud, who was previously a university professor and dean, is a civil and political rights activist. He was born in the central Hiran region and grew up in Mogadishu. Mohamud comes from a middle-class family and speaks both Somali and English. Mohamud completed a master's degree in technical education in 1988, and he's also a graduate of Eastern Mennonite University based in Virginia. Mohamud entered Somali politics in 2011 when he established the Independent Peace and Development Party, PDP. In August 2012, Mohamud was selected as a Member of Parliament of the newly formed Federal Parliament of Somalia. The same year, legislators elected him as the President of Somalia during the country's 2012 presidential elections. In his acceptance speech, President Mohamud sent a powerful message of progress to all of Africa and indeed to the entire world. And many described the moment as the beginning of a new era for Somalia, as well as the conclusion of the transitional period. The then Ethiopian Prime Minister Haile Desalegn also shared this view and said the following during the time.
Unfettered by decades of war and chaos, you have come back with vigor and hope. The civility with which the other presidential contenders have accepted the result of the election is a hopeful indication that Somalia is finally closing the old chapter of warlordism and chaos. Ethiopia is hopeful that with the spirit you have now exhibited and with the characteristic entrepreneurship of the Somali people, your great country will assume its rightful place in the community of nations.
Of course, the coming of President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud into power sent a very strong and positive signal, not only to former Ethiopian Prime Minister Haile Desalegn, but for so many people and to the international community as well. Consequently, neighboring countries like Ethiopia worked a lot to rejuvenate and re-energize the relationship between the two countries that was significantly tarnished during the time of General Mohamed Siad Barre. In his previous term, President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud was considered as a closet friend of the Ethiopian government, which at the time helped both countries to fight Al-Shabaab militants. Mahamudu, who is now 66, returns as Somalia's president for a second time, and it is believed to take forward the past relation between the two countries to yet another phase of cooperation and solidarity. Ethiopia, of course, welcomes the resuming of President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud into power with a clear congratulatory message from PM Abiy Ahmed during the inauguration of Mahamud's presidency. Abiy expressed Ethiopia's commitment to supporting durable peace in Somalia and looking forward to work closely with Somalia's new leadership on common bilateral and regional interests. Listen to this.
The government and people of Ethiopia in the last few years have strengthened ties with our brothers and sisters in Somalia. This has come about as a result of a change in our foreign policy, which is rooted in collaboration for mutual growth and development. We don't view our progress as a nation separate from that of our neighbors, for we truly understand that a neighbor at peace with itself is an ally for our path to prosperity.
President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud and his administration are also expected to reciprocate this Ethiopia's gesture of good faith with a renewed spirit of friendship and solidarity. Many believe that President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud builds on the former President Farmajo's good relations with the Abiy administration, especially in fighting the Somalia-based terrorist group Al-Shabaab and other terror-affiliated groups within and outside Somalia. In this regard, Somalia has a double responsibility in fighting this terrorist group, both in its own capacity and collaborating with neighboring countries like Ethiopia and the international community at large. Accordingly, Mahamud's administration is expected to work closely with Ethiopia as Al-Shabaab is trying to make some incursions into Ethiopia's border since recent days. National Security Advisor to the Ethiopian Prime Minister, Ambassador Redwan Hussein, said the recent incursion attempt was to disrupt Ethiopia's ongoing efforts to develop its natural resources on top of fusing geopolitical interests. Of course, Al-Shabaab has long regarded Ethiopia as an enemy for its long military presence inside Somalia. Now, the terrorist group is also trying to exploit Ethiopia's internal condition and trying to create triple alliance with Ethiopia's designated terrorist groups, Shane and the TPLF. Ethiopia, of course, countered the recent incursion well, as it has long been resisting such cross-border attacks by the same or related terrorist groups. In the counteroffensive taken by the National Defense Force and Somali Region Special Force, members of the TPLF and Shane terrorist groups have been killed alongside the Al-Shabaab militants. Following the joint operation, the National Security Council of Ethiopia also announced that more than 3,000 Al-Shabaab militants were killed, including 3 prominent Al-Shabaab figures. In so doing, Ethiopia gave Al-Shabaab the right signals that it cannot expand its footprint into its territories regardless of its networking with local terrorist groups like Shane and TPLF. However, there are uncertainties that certain members of President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud's government may also derail earlier efforts to improve relations between Somalia and Ethiopia. The uncertainty actually comes from Hassan Sheikh Mohamud's strong relationship with the Tigray People's Liberation Front TPLF when the latter were dominating power and politics in Ethiopia before 2018. And there are also some clear indications from the terrorist TPLF leaders to hijack Mohamud's administration against Ethiopia's national interest. Ethiopia believes such futile attempts of the TPLF group cannot be welcomed by President Sheikh Mohamud's administration, partly or fully. But if President Hassan's administration fails to do so, it might spell disaster for Somalia, making it a hub for another terrorist group on top of Al-Shabaab. It may also cost Hassan's administration to lose one of its important allies in the Horn of Africa. So now is the time for the Somalia President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud to come forward and show his solidarity with Ethiopia, both in fighting Al-Shabaab and taking the country's relations forward. Of course, fighting Al-Shabaab primarily benefits Somalia as the terrorist group bases its roots in the country. But it also benefits Ethiopia as Al-Shabaab is a security threat to the entire region. Ethiopia also attaches highest consideration to the peace of its neighboring countries, as it was rightly expressed by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed at the inaugural ceremony of Hassan Sheikh Mohamud's presidency in Mogadishu. Just listen.
I want to once again express and reiterate the commitment of the government of Ethiopia to Mr. President and the people of Somalia at large. My government is committed to work together in a more robust relationship to achieve a better future to our people and to determine our mutual destiny together.
Prime Minister Abiy has also made a foreign policy shift that gives important attention to neighboring countries. Accordingly, Ethiopia considers a peaceful and strong Somalia is important for a strong and prosperous Ethiopia. Ethiopia believes strong neighbors are better than strong fences. The time is therefore now for the Somalia president to collaborate with the Ethiopian government and launch a more aggressive campaign against Al-Shabaab and other terror-affiliated groups, which have a long time been an enemy for both countries and beyond to the region. In so doing, the two countries can achieve their mutual interest and strengthen their bilateral relations. This, in turn, can perhaps be the biggest contribution of the two countries for the Horn of Africa and to the entire region as well. For such and related stories, you may join us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. This is ETV World from the Ethiopian Broadcasting Corporation, the voice of diversity and renaissance.